The oil baron invited his black maid to the business meeting as a cruel joke, never expecting her to actually appear at his door. But here she stood. Serafina Caldwell stepped through the mahogany doors of Cornelius Blackwood's dining room like morning light cutting through smoke. The laughter died first. Then the conversation. Finally, the gentle clink of crystal glasses against polished wood. She wore a black business suit that fit her frame with the precision of measured intention. Geological charts rested beneath her arm like weapons sheathed for the right moment. Her boots clicked against the hardwood with the steady rhythm of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Magnus Sterling's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Theodore Grimes set down his whiskey without tasting it. Jasper Holloway's eyes tracked her movement with the wariness of a man watching storm. Clouds gather on a clear day. Cornelius Blackwood felt his face drain of warmth. The woman who had scrubbed his floors for 3 years now commanded his dining room with the quiet authority of someone who belonged there, had always belonged there. Gentlemen. Her voice carried the weight of earth settling after rain. I believe you invited me to discuss oil rights. The silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. Sterling found his voice first, though it came out smaller than intended. Cornelius, what exactly is happening here? Blackwood's mouth opened and closed without sound. The joke he had crafted so carefully the night before now felt like a trap he had built around himself. He had wanted to humiliate her in front of Texas's most powerful men. He had wanted entertainment. Serafina approached their table where maps of Texas lay spread like a conquered territory divided among kings. The boundaries they had drawn in red ink seemed suddenly fragile under her steady gaze. She set her charts beside theirs with the deliberate care of a chess player making an opening move. The papers rustled like dry leaves before a storm. What you gentlemen don't realize, she said, her fingers tracing lines across geological surveys that looked far more detailed than anything they possessed, is that everything you think you know about oil in this region is wrong. Grimes laughed, but the sound held no humor. Where does a maid learn to read survey maps? The same place she learns that politeness costs nothing but buys everything. Her eyes met his without flinching. Your own library, Mr. Blackwood. 3 years of listening while you gentlemen discussed business over meals I served. 3 years of reading the books you never touched after you bought them for decoration. Blackwood's hands trembled as he reached for his glass. The whiskey tasted like ash. Sterling leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating look of a man reassessing a horse he had dismissed as worthless. You've been educating yourself. I've been preparing. The word hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Preparing for what, they wondered, but none dared ask. Holloway cleared his throat. This is amusing, Cornelius, but we have serious business to discuss. This is serious business. Serafina spread her first chart across their carefully planned territorial divisions. You're all drilling in the wrong places. The map showed geological formations with a precision that made their own surveys look like children's drawings. Every rock layer was marked. Every potential oil deposit calculated. Every depth measurement recorded with mathematical certainty. Blackwood studied the chart despite himself. The detail was extraordinary. The annotations were written in a hand he recognized from shopping lists and household accounts, but the knowledge they contained belonged to someone he had never bothered to see. Professor Eleanor Hartwick at the Colorado School of Mines has been corresponding with me for 2 years. Seraphine's voice remained steady as mountain stone. Correspondence education is a remarkable thing when you have the dedication to pursue it. Sterling's confidence began to crack like poorly set mortar. You're telling us that a professor would waste time teaching a domestic servant? She's teaching a geologist who happens to work in domestic service. The correction carried no anger, only fact. Intelligence doesn't require permission to exist, Mr. Sterling. Grimes stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This has gone far enough. Cornelius, control your help." Blackwood found himself unable to speak. The woman before him bore no resemblance to the quiet figure who had cleaned his study. While he conducted business, this person had been listening, learning, planning, for 3 years. "Sit down, Mr. Grimes." Seraphine's command carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Unless you'd prefer to continue losing money on surface deposits that will run dry within 2 years. Grimes remained standing, but his bluster faded. Like smoke and wind, she unrolled a second chart. This one showed drilling patterns across 3 counties, marked with production numbers and projected depletion dates. The accuracy was devastating. The real oil lies 30 feet deeper than any of you have bothered to dig. The geological formations you've been chasing are fool's gold. Pretty on the surface, worthless underneath. Holloway leaned forward to spite himself. "How could you possibly know our drilling depths? You discuss business at every meal. I serve every meal. Mathematics is simply a matter of paying attention." Blackwood felt the room shifting around him like quicksand. The entertainment he had planned for his guests was becoming something else entirely. Something that made his collar feel too tight and his mouth taste of copper. Serafina reached into her jacket and withdrew a folded document, its edges worn soft with age and handling. She placed it on the table with the reverence of someone laying flowers on a grave. "This is the deed to 400 acres of land you gentlemen consider worthless. Scrub brush and rocky soil, unfit for cattle or crops." She paused, letting them absorb the implications. "But perfect for oil extraction, once you know where to look." The silence that followed was different from before. It carried weight and possibility and the sudden understanding that the evening had become something none of them had anticipated. 24 hours earlier, Serafina had knelt in the same room, scrubbing whiskey stains from floorboards while Eastern investors discussed railway expansion. Her hands moved in steady circles against the wood grain. Her ears captured every word about mineral rights and land speculation. The investors never glanced at her, neither did Blackwood. She was furniture with a heartbeat, decoration that cleaned itself and required no acknowledgement. This invisibility had become her greatest weapon. She had perfected the art of being present while remaining unseen. 3 years of serving meals during business discussions. 3 years of dusting bookshelves while contracts were negotiated. 3 years of existing in the margins of conversations that shaped the economic landscape of Texas. Her leather journal lay hidden beneath loose floorboards in the servants' quarters. Each night after the household slept, she recorded everything. Oil prices from Pittsburgh. Geological surveys discussed over brandy. Investment strategies debated during card games. The handwriting was careful, educated, self-educated. Blackwood's library had become her university. Technical manuals on geological formations, engineering texts about drilling equipment, financial reports from Pennsylvania oil fields. She read by candlelight while the mansion dreamed above her. The irony burned steady in her chest. The man who treated her as invisible had provided the very resources for her transformation. That morning, she had served breakfast while Blackwood planned his evening's entertainment. His voice carried the casual cruelty of a man who had never questioned his right to inflict humiliation. "The boys will get a kick out of this," he told his reflection in the dining room mirror. Sierra discussing oil rights with the most powerful men in Texas. His laughter echoed off crystal chandeliers and polished silver. The sound cut through her like wind through bare branches. She continued clearing plates with steady hands. Her face revealed nothing of the calculation occurring behind her eyes. When he turned to her, his grin held the malicious joy of a child pulling wings off flies. "Sierra, you should join us tonight. We're discussing territorial divisions. I'm sure these gentlemen would value your expert opinion on petroleum extraction." The words dripped with mockery. His guests would find it hilarious. A black woman pretending to understand business matters beyond her station. Entertainment disguised as inclusion. "What time should I arrive, Mr. Blackwood?" Her acceptance caught him off guard. He had expected protests or confusion. Instead, she met his eyes with the calm acceptance of someone who had been waiting for exactly this invitation. 7 o'clock, dress appropriately. His tone suggested he expected her usual maid's uniform. Something to emphasize the joke's punchline. She nodded once and returned to her duties. The afternoon passed in careful preparation. She pressed her one good dress, a black ensemble purchased with savings, accumulated coin by coin over months. The fabric was simple, but well-tailored. Professional without pretension. In her hidden quarters, she reviewed 3 years of accumulated intelligence. Production numbers from Sterling's Wells. Grimes's financial difficulties following a string of dry holes. Holloway's secret negotiations with railroad companies. Information gathered while invisible. Knowledge acquired through enforced silence. The leather portfolio had been her most expensive purchase. Inside, she arranged geological surveys hand-copied from Blackwood's own files. Charts showing rock formations and soil composition across 4 counties. Data that revealed patterns the original owners had missed. Her correspondence with Professor Hartwick had begun 2 years earlier. A carefully worded letter sent to the Colorado School of Mines, requesting information about correspondence courses in geology. She had expected rejection or silence. Instead, she received encouragement and curriculum. Materials. The professor's letters arrived monthly, addressed to a post office box in town. Each contained assignments, corrections to her geological observations, and praise for insights that impressed even academic experts. "Your analysis of sedimentary layering in the Texas plains shows remarkable understanding of petroleum geology," one letter had stated. "I would welcome you as a student in my formal program, should circumstances ever permit." Circumstances would never permit. But education required no permission when pursued with sufficient determination. As evening approached, she stood before her small mirror and pinned her hair into a style befitting a business meeting. The woman reflected back bore little resemblance to the invisible servant who cleaned Blackwood's floors. This woman had presence, authority, the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for a single crucial moment. She tucked the portfolio under her arm and walked toward the mansion's main entrance instead of the servant's door. The symbolism was deliberate. Tonight, she would not enter as help. The evening air carried the scent of oil fires burning in distant fields. Fortunes were being made and lost in those flames. Men gambled with Earth's blood while she had spent 3 years learning its secrets. Her footsteps on the front porch sounded like thunder in the stillness. Through the dining room windows, she could see them gathered around their maps. Masters of an industry built on assumptions and inherited privilege. They carved up territory with the casual confidence of men who had never been questioned. She raised her hand to knock, then paused. This moment would change everything. There would be no return into invisibility after tonight. No safety in being overlooked and underestimated. But safety had never been the goal. Justice was. Her grandfather's voice echoed across years and memory. The ground keeps its secrets until someone worthy comes to ask the right questions. She knocked 3 times, firm, purposeful, the sound of someone who belonged exactly where they stood. Footsteps approached from inside. The door handle turned. The evening's true business was about to begin. The deed in Seraphine's hands carried the weight of blood and dreams. Ezekiel Caldwell's signature still showed the careful loops of a man who had taught himself to write in firelight after 14-hour days, breaking earth that would never belong to him. Until it did. The 400 acres stretched beyond the town's eastern edge, where decent folk claimed nothing worthwhile could grow. Rocky soil split by dry creek beds. Scrub brush that turned brown before spring ended. Land that's civilized. Men dismissed with waves of their hands and calculations of worthlessness. Her grandfather had seen something different. Serafina folded the deed carefully and slipped it back into her jacket. The room of oil barons studied her with the intensity of men discovering their assumptions had foundations built on sand. Sterling broke the silence first. His voice carried the strain of someone whose world had shifted beneath his feet. "You're claiming ownership of the Henderson Tract." "I'm stating ownership of the Henderson Tract. The deed is recorded at the courthouse. Has been for 37 years. Blackwood leaned forward, his face pale in the lamplight. "That land is worthless. We surveyed it ourselves 2 years ago." "You surveyed the surface. I've been studying what lies beneath." She unrolled another chart, this one showing geological cross-sections of her grandfather's land. The detail was extraordinary. Rock layers mapped with scientific precision. Soil composition analyzed down to mineral content. Underground formations that told a story written in stone and pressure across geological ages. Grimes squinted at the markings. "Where did you get equipment for subsurface analysis?" "I made it. Blacksmith work combined with engineering principles." "From your library, Mr. Blackwood. Amazing what you can accomplish when invisibility provides unlimited access to information." The words landed with the force of stones dropped into still water. Ripples of understanding spread across their faces as they realized the scope of her preparation. Holloway stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness where fortunes were being extracted from Earth, that revealed its secrets only to those who asked the right questions. "How long have you been planning this?" "Planning suggests I knew this moment would come. I've been preparing for whatever moment might come." She moved to stand beside him at the window. The distant glow of oil fires painted the horizon in shades of ambition and desperation. Men worked through the night chasing surface wealth while deeper treasures waited in patient darkness. My grandfather spent 40 years studying that land. Every season brought new observations about soil composition and underground formations. He kept journals written on whatever paper he could find, receipts, newspaper margins, the backs of seed packets. Her voice carried the weight of inherited knowledge. Wisdom passed from calloused hands to willing heart across years of quiet teaching. He noticed things. Water seeping through certain rock formations. The way plants grew differently in specific areas. How the ground felt different under bare feet after rain. He called it reading the Earth's intentions. Blackwood cleared his throat. Intentions don't extract oil. Equipment does. Capital does. Capital follows knowledge. Equipment follows understanding. My grandfather had both. She returned to the table and spread a third chart. This one showed the locations where her grandfather had conducted primitive but accurate geological testing. Hand-dug test holes. Soil samples analyzed through methods he had developed himself. Water table measurements taken with tools crafted in his own forge. The pattern revealed itself across decades of careful observation. Underground formations that suggested petroleum deposits larger than anything currently being extracted in Texas. Sterling studied the chart with growing unease. This suggests reserves that would dwarf our current operations. This proves reserves that will make your current operations obsolete. The statement hung in the air between them. Challenge and promise combined in words that redrew the economic map of their understanding. Grimes returned to his chair, his movements heavy with the weight of implications. "You're talking about millions of dollars in potential extraction." "I'm talking about reshaping the oil industry in Texas." Serafina rolled up her charts with the careful precision of someone who understood their value. Information was power only when deployed at the precise moment for maximum impact. "Professor Hartwick has confirmed my geological analysis. Eastern investors have reviewed my projections. The Texas Pacific Railroad has examined my transportation proposals." Blackwood's whiskey glass trembled in his grip. You've been conducting business negotiations. I've been conducting business preparation. Tonight is negotiation. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew a letter bearing the official seal of the Colorado School of Mines. The paper crackled with academic authority as she placed it before them. Professor Eleanor Hartwick will arrive in Texas next month to supervise drilling operations on the Caldwell Tract. She's bringing mining equipment purchased with investment capital from Pennsylvania steel interests. The revelation struck them with the force of unexpected lightning. This was no longer a woman with ambitious dreams. This was a fully capitalized business venture with academic backing and industrial support. Holloway sank into his chair. You've secured financing. I've secured partnership with people who value intelligence over inheritance, competence over comfort, results over reputation. She gathered her materials with the efficient movements of someone whose business was concluded. The charts disappeared into her portfolio. The letter returned to its protective envelope. Gentlemen, you invited me here as entertainment. I accepted your invitation as opportunity. The question now is whether you'll adapt to changing circumstances or become casualties of your own assumptions. The oil baron sat in stunned silence as she prepared to leave. Their evening of amusement had become an education in the price of underestimating people they considered beneath notice. Sterling found his voice. What exactly are you proposing? Serafina paused at the door, her hand resting on the brass handle that separated their world from the larger possibilities waiting outside. I'm not proposing anything, Mr. Sterling. I'm informing you that the oil industry in Texas is about to change. How you respond to that change will determine whether you remain relevant. She stepped into the night air, leaving behind 4 men who had entered the evening as masters of their domain and would leave it as students of forces they had failed to recognize. The D in her jacket carried the weight of transformation. Her grandfather's dreams were about to become Texas reality. The silence that followed Seraphine's departure stretched across the dining room like shadow across drought-cracked earth. 4 men who had entered the evening as titans of industry now sat diminished by the understanding that their empire rested on incomplete knowledge. Sterling's hands shook as he reached for his whiskey. The amber liquid caught lamplight and threw it back in fractured patterns that seemed to mock his certainty. She's been listening to us for 3 years. The words carried the weight of violated trust and professional humiliation. Every contract negotiated over dinner. Every territorial agreement discussed during card games. Every weakness revealed in moments of assumed privacy. Blackwood's face had aged a decade in the span of an hour. Deep lines carved themselves around his eyes as he processed the scope of his miscalculation. The woman who had served his meals had been collecting intelligence with the patience of someone planning a campaign. Every conversation about drilling locations, he whispered to the empty air. Every discussion of production costs. Every argument about territorial boundaries. Grimes slammed his glass down with enough force to crack the crystal base. The sound shattered the contemplative quiet and brought them back to immediate concerns. She knows our business better than we do. The admission hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. 3 years of accumulated knowledge had given her advantages they were only beginning to understand. While they had dismissed her as invisible help, she had been constructing a comprehensive understanding of their industry's vulnerabilities. Holloway stood and began pacing the length of the dining room. His boots struck the hardwood in a rhythm that matched his racing thoughts. The geological surveys she showed us. They're more detailed than anything we've commissioned. Because she's been studying our land while we've been assuming we understood it. Sterling's voice carried the bitter taste of recognition. She knows where we're drilling. She knows our production numbers. She knows which wells will fail before we do. The implications spread through their consciousness like poison through water. Strategic advantage built on their own carelessness. Information warfare conducted by someone they had trained to be invisible. Blackwood rose from his chair with the careful movements of someone whose legs had forgotten how to support his weight. He walked to his safe and withdrew a leather folder containing his most sensitive business documents: contracts with railroad companies, correspondence with Eastern investors, financial projections based on current drilling operations. His hands trembled as he opened the folder. Every page represented decisions made in Seraphine's presence. Every figure had been discussed while she cleared dishes or polished furniture. Every strategic plan had been revealed to someone they had never considered capable of understanding its significance. "She's not just competition," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's competition with 3 years of advance intelligence about our operations." The words settled over them like dust after an explosion. The evening's humiliation was transforming into something larger. Professional survival was now at stake. Grimes loosened his collar as if the air had grown too thick to breathe. "The Henderson Tract. If her geological analysis is accurate, she's sitting on reserves that could supply half the eastern seaboard, while we're extracting surface deposits that will be exhausted within 2 years. Holloway's pacing intensified. She's been watching us drain shallow wells while she mapped deeper formations we never bothered to explore." Sterling pulled out a map of current drilling operations and spread it across the table. Red marks indicated active wells. Blue marks showed projected expansion sites. The pattern revealed itself with devastating clarity when viewed through the lens of Seraphine's geological charts. "We're mining fool's gold," he said, his finger tracing their drilling patterns. "Surface deposits that look promising but lack the depth for sustained extraction, while she's been planning to tap into the real reserves 30 feet below our deepest wells." Blackwood's admission carried the weight of professional defeat. She let us exhaust ourselves chasing shadows, while she prepared to extract substance. The fire in the hearth crackled and hissed, consuming wood that would never become forest again. The sound provided counterpoint to their growing understanding of how completely they had been outmaneuvered. Holloway stopped pacing and faced his colleagues. "The letter from the Colorado School of Mines. Professor Hartwick is a real person with real credentials. I've heard of her work on mineral extraction in Colorado mining operations, so the academic backing is genuine." Grimes rubbed his temples where pain was building pressure. "This isn't the fantasy of an ambitious servant. This is a fully developed business venture with scientific support and Eastern financing." Sterling's voice carried the hollow tone of someone recognizing inevitable defeat. "Pennsylvania steel interests have deeper pockets than all of us combined." Blackwood returned to his chair, his movements heavy with the weight of implications. The woman who had been invisible for 3 years had spent that time becoming visible to people who mattered. While they had ignored her, she had been building relationships with investors who valued competence over social standing. "She said she's not proposing anything," he recalled. "She's informing us that the industry is changing." The distinction was crucial. Proposals could be negotiated, rejected, modified to suit existing power structures. Information simply existed, demanding adaptation from those wise enough to accept new realities. Grimes leaned back in his chair until it creaked under the pressure. "What are options?" The question hung in the air like smoke from distant fires. Options required power, and power required information they no longer possessed exclusively. The woman who had served their meals now held advantages they couldn't match through traditional means. Sterling folded the drilling map with careful precision. "We could challenge her land claims in court. On what grounds?" Holloway's question carried the weight of legal reality. The deed is recorded. 37 years of legitimate ownership. Her grandfather's signature is on file at the courthouse. Then we challenge her competence, her right to operate industrial equipment, her qualifications to conduct geological surveys. Grimes's suggestion carried desperation disguised as strategy. Blackwood shook his head slowly. With Professor Hartwick supervising operations, with Eastern investors backing the venture, we'd be challenging the Colorado School of Mines and Pennsylvania steel interests. The silence that followed carried understanding of their true situation. They were no longer fighting a former servant with ambitious dreams. They were confronting a fully capitalized industrial operation with scientific backing and academic credentials. "She's not playing by our rules," Sterling said finally. "She's playing by rules that make our rules obsolete." The fire continued burning in the hearth, consuming fuel that would never grow back. Outside, oil fires burned in the darkness where men worked through the night chasing wealth that existed only on the surface. Deeper wealth waited in patient darkness, ready to reward those who understood how to ask the right questions of unforgiving earth. The midnight air carried the scent of change when Serafina walked back to her grandfather's cabin. Behind her, lamplight still burned in Blackwood's dining room where 4 men wrestled with the collapse of their assumptions. Ahead, her real work waited. The cabin sat on land that would soon become the center of an industrial revolution. Wooden walls that had sheltered decades of planning would witness the birth of an empire, built on knowledge instead of inheritance. She lit the oil lamp and pulled her grandfather's journal from its hiding place beneath loose floorboards. The leather cover was worn smooth by countless hands seeking wisdom from pages that contained a lifetime of observation. The earth keeps its secrets until someone worthy asks the right questions. His handwriting covered every page with careful observations about soil composition and underground formations. Water tables mapped across seasons. Rock formations sketched with the precision of someone who understood that details determine destinies. Serafina opened her own journal beside his. 3 years of accumulated intelligence filled pages with production numbers, drilling patterns and strategic weaknesses observed while invisible. Information that revealed the oil baron's empire rested on assumptions rather than understanding. The moral weight of her knowledge pressed against her chest like stone. She possessed enough evidence to destroy 4 men's reputations and financial standing. Insider trading conducted over dinner conversations. Safety violations that had killed workers. Bribery disguised as charitable contributions. Justice would be simple. Anonymous letters to newspaper editors. Documents delivered to federal investigators. Evidence that would topple their empire and satisfy years of accumulated humiliation. But destruction had never been her grandfather's way. She traced his sketches of underground formations with her fingertip. Patient observation instead of violent reaction. Understanding instead of revenge. Building something better rather than tearing down something flawed. A knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. 3 sharp raps that suggested urgency. Without desperation. Sterling stood on her threshold, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled by the evening's revelations. His collar was loosened. His hair showed the tracks of anxious fingers. His eyes carried the weight of someone whose certainty had crumbled. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without speaking. He entered her simple home with the careful movements of someone entering foreign territory. His gaze swept across geological equipment that rivaled anything in professional laboratories. Charts that showed more detail than surveys his company had. Commissioned. Books that revealed the depth of her self-education. "You've been building this for years." "I've been preparing for opportunity. Tonight provided it." Sterling examined her correspondence with Professor Hartwick. Letters that demonstrated intellectual exchange between equals. Academic recognition that validated her geological expertise. "You could have exposed us instead of competing with us." The statement carried the weight of confession. He understood how much damaging information she possessed. How many careers she could end with strategic revelation of overheard conversations. Exposure would have been temporary satisfaction. Competition provides permanent change. She moved to stand beside her window, looking out at land that would soon bristle with drilling equipment. The Henderson Tract would become the foundation of an industrial operation that redefined oil extraction in Texas. What you're proposing will make our current operations obsolete. What I'm implementing will make inefficient operations unprofitable. Excellence tends to have that effect on mediocrity. Sterling's shoulders sagged under the weight of professional reality. His empire was built on surface extraction that provided quick profits but lacked sustainability. Her operation would tap deeper reserves that could produce for decades. You have a choice to make, Mr. Sterling. Adapt to changing circumstances or become a casualty of your own limitations. The words echoed those she had spoken in Blackwood's dining room, challenge disguised as opportunity. Evolution or extinction presented as business decision. He studied her geological surveys with the intensity of someone whose survival depended on understanding new information. The charts revealed formations that his company had never bothered to explore. Wealth that existed 30 feet below there. Deepest wells. Partnership, he said finally. Combine our resources with your knowledge. Share profits instead of competing for market dominance. Partnership requires equals. You're offering to buy your way into discoveries you lack the competence to make independently. The rejection was gentle but absolute. She had spent 3 years preparing for independence, not for negotiated subordination to the men who had dismissed her potential. Sterling's face showed the strain of someone whose options were disappearing. Then what do you want? I want to demonstrate that intelligence matters more than inheritance. That preparation trumps privilege. That the best ideas should succeed, regardless of who presents them. She returned to her desk and withdrew a document that carried the weight of industrial transformation. A contract with the Texas Pacific Railroad for direct transportation of extracted oil to eastern markets. Terms that bypass the existing distribution network controlled by the oil barons. Professor Hartwick arrives next month with equipment. Purchased through Pennsylvania Steel interests. Drilling begins immediately after geological surveys confirm extraction sites. Production estimates suggest output that will supply half the eastern seaboard within 2 years. Sterling read the railroad contract with growing comprehension of how completely she had outmaneuvered established interests. You're not just competing with us, you're replacing us. I'm demonstrating what's possible when competence guides operations instead of assumptions. The fire in her small stove crackled with steady warmth. Wood transformed into heat and light and energy that served useful purposes. The sound provided counterpoint to their conversation about transformation on a larger scale. My colleagues will try to destroy you through legal challenges. They'll question your right to operate industrial equipment. They'll claim you lack the qualifications for geological surveys. Let them try. Professor Hartwick's credentials are impeccable. Eastern investors have deeper resources than Texas oil barons. The Colorado School of Mines carries more academic weight than local prejudices. Sterling's hands trembled as he set down the railroad contract. You've thought of everything. I've prepared for everything I could anticipate. The rest will be handled as circumstances require. She opened her door and stepped onto the porch where night air carried the scent of distant oil fires. Men worked through darkness chasing surface wealth while deeper treasures waited in patient earth. Mr. Sterling, you can return to your colleagues and plan strategies for fighting change. Or you can accept that change is inevitable and focus on adapting to new realities. He joined her on the porch, staring out at land that would soon become the center of an industrial revolution. What happens to men like us? That depends on whether you're willing to learn from women like me. The words carried finality that settled over them like dust after thunder. The evening's confrontation was complete. The future belonged to those wise enough to embrace it. Sterling walked into darkness that would soon be illuminated by the flames of a new industrial age. Behind him, Serafina planned the transformation of Texas oil extraction from assumption to science. 6 months transformed the Texas landscape from assumption to reality. The Caldwell Oil Company derrick rose against the horizon like a monument to the power of preparation over privilege. Steam engines worked through dawn and dusk, extracting wealth that had waited decades for someone wise enough to ask the right questions. Serafina stood on the platform overlooking operations that produced more oil per day than the combined output of 4 established companies. Her tailored business suit reflected success built on geological science rather than territorial guesswork. The woman who had once scrubbed floors now supervised an industrial empire. Professor Eleanor Hartwick emerged from the equipment shed, her hands stained with the honest dirt of scientific fieldwork. The collaboration between academic expertise and practical knowledge had created extraction methods that redefined efficiency in petroleum operations. The new drill bits arrived from Pittsburgh yesterday, Hartwick reported. We'll reach the deepest formations by month's end. Below them, workers operated machinery with the precision of men who understood their safety depended on competent leadership. No corners were cut. No risks were taken with human lives. Every procedure followed protocols designed to protect the people who made prosperity possible. The contrast with previous operations was stark. Where other companies had sacrificed worker safety for profit margins, Caldwell Oil invested in equipment that protected lives while increasing productivity. Where others had relied on surface extraction that depleted quickly, Caldwell tapped deep reserves that would produce for decades. A carriage approached across the dirt road that connected the drilling site to town. Serafina recognized the familiar figure of Cornelius Blackwood before he stepped down from the driver's seat. His appearance had changed over the months. The arrogance had been replaced by something resembling humility. He approached with the careful steps of someone entering territory that no longer belonged to him. His former mansion was visible in the distance, transformed from a monument to inherited wealth into something that served the community's future. Miss Caldwell. His greeting carried respect that had been absent from their previous interactions. I wanted to see the school before the ceremony. The Caldwell School occupied the building where she had once served meals while planning this moment. Children's laughter echoed from windows that had witnessed business negotiations built on prejudice and assumption. The sound of young voices learning together represented transformation more meaningful than industrial success. The first integrated school in the county, she replied. Education doesn't recognize the artificial boundaries that adults create. They walked together toward the building where her grandfather's portrait hung in the main hallway. Ezekiel. Caldwell's painted eyes watched over children who would inherit a world shaped by his patience and his granddaughter's determination. Inside, students of all backgrounds bent over books that taught geology, mathematics, and engineering. Knowledge flowed freely to minds capable of absorbing it. Intelligence was cultivated regardless of the social circumstances that had previously determined educational opportunity. Blackwood paused before a classroom where young girls studied the same geological texts that had educated their teacher. You're training your replacements. I'm training the future. These children will solve problems we haven't imagined yet. The observation carried the weight of long-term thinking that extended beyond immediate profit toward generational impact. The school would produce geologists, engineers, and business leaders who understood that competence mattered more than inherited position. They continued to the main auditorium where the dedication ceremony would take place. Workers from the Anzinco oil operation mingled with townspeople who had initially dismissed the Caldwell project as impossible ambition. Success had converted skeptics into supporters. Sterling approached with the measured steps of someone whose empire had been peacefully conquered. His company now operated as a subsidiary of Caldwell Oil, extracting surface deposits under guidelines that prioritized safety and sustainability. The Pennsylvania investors want to expand operations into Oklahoma territory, he reported. They're requesting your geological Analysis of formations near Tulsa. The request represented validation from Eastern financiers who valued results over regional prejudices. Serafine's expertise was becoming the foundation for industrial expansion across multiple states. Professor, Hartwick will conduct the preliminary surveys next month. If the formations match our projections, we'll begin operations by year's end. Grimes and Holloway stood near the refreshment table, their conversation subdued by the understanding that they now existed in a world shaped by someone they had once dismissed. Their company survived by adapting to standards set by superior knowledge and more efficient methods. The ceremony began with words that honored Ezekiel Caldwell's vision and his granddaughter's execution of dreams that had seemed impossible to men of limited imagination. The portrait was unveiled to applause that acknowledged both past wisdom and present achievement. Serafina addressed the gathered crowd with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through position. My grandfather used to say that the best response to those who underestimate you is becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Not despite their mockery, but because of the strength their mockery revealed. The words settled over the audience with the weight of lived truth. Children who would inherit expanded possibilities listened beside adults who had learned to recognize intelligence regardless of its source. Education is the foundation of every achievement represented here today. Knowledge transforms possibility into reality. Understanding converts dreams into tangible progress. Through the windows, the Caldwell oil derrick continued its steady extraction of wealth that funded schools, supported families, and demonstrated the power of preparation meeting opportunity. The site represented transformation on multiple levels. After the ceremony, Blackwood lingered as the crowd dispersed toward futures that had been expanded by the evening's recognition of what determination could accomplish when guided by intelligence and supported by moral courage. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "You owe me gratitude. Your cruelty taught me I was stronger than I knew, and your success taught me I was smaller than I thought." The exchange carried the weight of completed transformation. The man who had invited his maid to a business meeting as entertainment now supervised operations under the guidance of someone whose vision extended beyond immediate profit toward lasting impact. Evening light painted the derrick and the school in shades of gold that promised continued prosperity, built on solid foundations. Children walked home carrying books that would prepare them for opportunities their parents had never imagined possible. The Texas oil industry had been forever changed by a woman who understood that the best revenge against underestimation was excellence that could not be dismissed or diminished. Her grandfather's dreams had become reality through the patient application of intelligence to apparently impossible circumstances. The derrick continued pumping wealth from earth that had kept its secrets until someone worthy had asked the right questions. The sound echoed across transformed landscape, where assumptions had given way to understanding and prejudice had yielded to competence. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.